much for agreeing to do this discussion and talk about the topic of 1031 exchanges. It comes up a ton, especially for people who are working as a realtor and investor. But hey, why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are and what you do.
Sure, Nate. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. I'm really excited to discuss with you today 1031 exchanges. I'm passionate about it, and there's a lot to cover. But I am Tom Gustafson, and I'm with Atlas 1031 Exchange. We're based out of Orlando, Florida, and have a regional office in the Panhandle of Florida as well. We've been around for 15 years and basically seen it all. We have accommodated transactions here domestically, all over the country, and even do a lot internationally as well. So I'm sure we're going to cover some of that today, and I'm just excited to kind of get into some of the basics and even some of the more complex stuff that we'll talk about. But I think it'll all be really accessible for anyone that has never heard of a 1031. And I also think it'll be fun and interesting enough that it's not going to be, boring and bounce worthy. So
there's no guarantee it won't be boring. I'm not making that guarantee.
With this shirt, I mean, we've got to keep the game up, and you've got the Rifle Paper Company on the wall, so we're in really good shape.
It's true, and I've got my I'm using my wife's coffee cup here, very pretty. So it's all good. Well, hey, let's just jump into it then. So what are some of the basics of a 1031 exchange?
Absolutely. So if you were to hop on Google and put in 1031 exchange, you're going to see some consistency. One of the first things that's going to jump out is the two numbers, 45 and 180. And this is usually what most realtors, most investors know about. It's, okay, yeah, I know that there's two timetables. What are they? Why are they important? So we'll start there. So once you close on a relinquished property as what we call a taxpayer, so that's the language I use.
So when you sell a property?
Correct. When you sell a property as a taxpayer, that starts a clock. And it's a very inflexible clock that is set forth by the Internal Revenue Code, Section 1031, where 1031 exchange gets its name. So you have 45 days from the day that you close to identify property that you're going to replace with. Now, we'll probably talk a lot today about relinquished properties, which is the one that the taxpayer, the client, owns, and then the replacement property, which is where the like-kind exchange comes in. So that replacement property has to be identified in 45 days. And from the moment you close on your relinquished property, you also start a second ticker, and that's called the exchange period. And that means you have 180 days to not only identify, but then close on your replacement property. Now, these are extremely inflexible to the extent that I won't even explain the very nuanced, flexibilities of it. But that's basically what you should, as an individual that's interested in 1031, think: 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. And those are calendar days. So if that falls on Christmas, too bad. You've got to get your transaction completed by that time, or your identification done. Secondly, we're going to talk probably in more detail about like kind. But like kind
I was going to ask you about that. You'd mentioned that, but I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so like kind is a term that's extremely general. And it essentially stands for if you have a property that you hold and you have a fact pattern that backs up that is an investment. If you relinquish that property or sell that property and replace it with a property, that property also must be used for investment purposes. There are other types of transactions where you could use a property that's been used for trade or business, but primarily the bulk of our work at Atlas 1031 is done with individual investors and their properties. So let's use a real life example. Let's say you have a condo at the beach. You've had it for 10 years, you want to sell it, it's highly appreciated. You would be able to, as long as you qualify for all the other grid that we would walk through to make sure that the transaction qualifies, you would qualify to be able to sell that property, and then you could replace that property with a warehouse or timberland or a lot or an apartment building or a DS.
Like kind just means investment?
Exactly. Like kind just means that your intent for your relinquished property was investment, and your intent for your replacement property is also investment. Now,
so I'm not selling and then buying a personal,
exactly,
my dream home. Okay.
Exactly. And to that point, let's drill into that really quick. A primary residence is not eligible for a 1031 exchange.
So I can't just upgrade my fourplex to the dream home. Okay.
No, you would have to, and that's a little more, we can talk about that later, but there are ways to eventually get into it. But just for where we are in the conversation now, primary residence not eligible. You can't sell your primary residence and 1031 in. You can't sell an investment property and replace with a property that you expect to move in as your primary residence. So that's really important. And honestly, that's one of the top questions that we get. People will call in and say, hey, I want to do a 1031 exchange. We'll drill down and then we'll find out, oh yeah, this is their primary residence or they're looking to buy a new one. In addition to the 45 and 180, the like kind rule, there's also an important piece that the same taxpayer who sells needs to be the same taxpayer who buys. So the question we always ask is who's on title? So that could be an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, an individual, so on. That individual has to track through the transaction and have the tax responsibility for both properties. So that's an important piece that often people don't understand. And I guess finally, just to round it out, in order to defer 100% of the capital gain and depreciation recapture, which is the whole point of the 1031 exchange.
That's the follow-up here. Why am I even bothering doing all that?
Yeah, let's just get into that then. So why even do this, right? Essentially, IRC section 1031, where 1031 exchange gets its name, has been in the tax code for almost as long as it's existed. So it's almost 100 years old. Now, the service, or the IRS, has been modifying it over the past 100 years. So now we're in a different place than we were, say, 60 years ago with our modern rules. But it's all documented through revenue procedures, and that's what we do as qualified intermediaries. And that's another basic point. You need to have an unbiased third party involved in the transaction. And that's what I do. I'm a qualified intermediary. So I would help you qualify your transaction based on the tax code. I would also hold your funds in escrow until you're ready to release them for the replacement property, because it's key that you as the taxpayer cannot have constructive receipt of your funds at any time in the process, or else the 1031 becomes void.
Okay, so I can't actually, I can't sell the house, take some of the money out, and then go use it for my 1031 exchange.
Right. So two things there. One, if you were doing a 1031 exchange, you could take some money out at the beginning and just pay capital gains tax on it, which is called partial exchange. But to your point as to what we're talking about, you're unable to have any constructive receipt of the funds. And that also means, oh, well, I have another bank account that I won't touch. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to have almost a trustee or someone that's outside of your circle manage those funds for you. And by that, it just means put them in a qualified escrow account, hold them there until you replace the property within the 180 days. Then they will wire the money to your new, say, title company or closing attorney, and the transaction's complete. But if at any point, let's say you've received funds, it's null. And what else is important about that is we get calls from people all the time who said, hey, I closed on my property last week. Can I do a 1031? And the answer is no. Because if you're already...
So you got to have this in motion before you close.
Yes. And so let's talk about that really quick. When should you talk to a qualified intermediary, right? Well, the sooner you know that you're interested in 1031, the better. But technically speaking, we typically like 2 weeks prior to closing. So let's say you have a house on the market and your house is in contract. That's a good time to contact a qualified intermediary. To just get the conversation going. If maybe you're not an educated investor who's aware of 1031s well before, if you find out about it at a cocktail party and you're in contract, that's a great time. Call me, right? Call a qualified intermediary to figure out where you are in the process. But also one thing we pride ourselves on is we get calls all the time for people who are like, I found out about a 1031 today. I'm closing tomorrow. Can you pull it off? And the answer is yes, absolutely. We can put all of our effort and focus on an individual's closing and get it done. We've done it before where people have waited on the closing table. So we can do that. It's not ideal, but you want to talk to a qualified intermediary at least, I would say, 2 weeks out of respect for your title company or your closing attorney. But we can make it happen faster. But that's what's really important there. There's a lot of information that we just ran through, but what's important is if you closed, it can't happen. There's one really minute way to make that happen, but it's not even worth talking about. So for all intents and purposes, if you've closed, it's a no-go. And if you find out about a 1031 a day before, we as Atlas can still make it happen.
Got it. So you said a lot of things there. You're throwing a lot at me, but okay, so you're doing a lot of things. Okay, we got a 45-day time period, we got a 180-day time period. You're managing someone's money, whether it's 300,000 or 30 million.
Right.
You know, I assume someone could do it that much.
Mm-hmm.
How much does this cost to do, and why is it worth just not pay? Why not just pay the capital gains?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. Well, just to address them in order, for a forward exchange, which is one taxpayer selling one property and replacing with one property, you can find it anywhere around $1,000. Our fee is $850. So we're a little bit lower than the average, but you can find it lower. So if you really want to dig, you can find someone that'll even beat our price. Typically, qualified intermediaries will get paid two ways. One is at closing, as part of the closing costs. It's just a check to the intermediary. And as you mentioned, the money in escrow, as we hold your net sales proceeds in a qualified escrow account that's non-commingled, that's linked to your tax identification number, that is a three-way security signature, so nothing's moving without your authorization. We also collect the interest on the funds as they sit in the account. And that's, 135 basis points. So for color, for every 100 grand, it's about $3.70 a day. So it's not crazy. And in some transactions, you've got a taxpayer who's like this happening this week, selling on Tuesday, replacing on Friday. We just wire the funds directly to the title company. That doesn't exist. So those are the two ways, transparently, those are the two ways that we get paid.
Okay.
And now to ask the question, kind of, you were saying, well, when does it make sense? One thing that we pride ourselves on is we don't force anybody to do 1031s. We don't sell them, right? So what we do is talk with individuals who find out about 1031s and are interested in deferring capital gains and depreciation recapture up to 100% if you do it appropriately. And then really it comes back to the individual. Does this make sense for the individual? We always encourage our taxpayers to speak with their CPA to calculate the capital gain, because it's different in every state. It's even different in every city. There are some borough capital gain taxes that are applied in New York. So it's tough to know as a qualified intermediary exactly how everything's going to come together for your gain. And we can talk big numbers. But that's really important also to have a CPA in the mix to make sure that it's even worth it for you, because you asked about pricing, and that's probably the least expensive way to do it. There's also reverse exchanges where, let's say you find a property first that you have to have because it's a killer deal.
Right.
Your other investment's not even on the market yet. What do? Well, there's a type of exchange called a reverse exchange, where you can purchase through what's called an exchange accommodating title holder, which is what we do, that property, and then you have 180 days to sell your relinquished property. So it's the reverse of the forward. Those are roughly around $5,500. So they're much more expensive because they're riskier, there's more to it. But it's a great tool to know that you have as an investor.
Okay, so man, there's so many things here. And I feel like we could go forever on this, and I want to keep us on somewhat of a timeline here, but that's all good. Okay, so here's one thing though. So I've got a rental property. I also have the luxury of student debt. Can I sell my rental property and just say, you know what, I want to pay off that student debt, but I want to pay those capital gains. I'm going to take the profit from this rental sale and just pay off my student debt and wash my hands. Can I do that?
No, you can't. One of the things that's ineligible, right, for the use of your funds is debt relief. So that actually applies even in your transaction. We just talked about, okay, what is a 1031? Well, 1031 allows you to defer your capital gains and depreciation recapture. In order to do that to 100%, the 100% degree, you need to carry over the net sales proceeds, so and also the debt from your original property. So let's say you have 100 grand in debt in your relinquished property, you need to equal that value in debt in your new property, because that's also considered debt relief. So the easiest way to think about it is, if you're selling a property for $400,000, you want to look for a property for $400,000. to be able to offset 100% of the gains and depreciation recapture. There's more detail to it, but for the sake of our conversation, that's probably the quickest way to think about it. But to your point about debt relief, that also applies within the transaction.
Okay. All right. So let's there's a few, probably maybe one or two, hopefully, investors watching this, right? And they're saying, this is great. Okay. I'm learning a bunch of things. I want to pick up the phone. I'm going to call someone who does 1031 exchanges today.
Yeah.
What are the questions that they should be thinking through to ask their intermediary? Because obviously, just like hiring a contractor or hiring a realtor, they're not all equal, are they?
No, not at all. The few questions that I would really encourage an investor to ask is, number one, is there a CES or certified exchange specialist on staff? My dad, who started the business 15 years ago, is a CES. That's the highest certification you can get as a QI domestically, and it's
who gives that certification?
The Federation of Exchange Accommodators, who are the only governing body of QIs domestically. So that'd be my second thing. Is this QI part of the FEA? The FEA not only it does the CES certification course, there's a code of ethics that goes along with being part of the FEA. There's a background check. So one thing you read, and so there's no reason about being coy about it, but there's no regulation or licensing that's needed to be a QI, which is terrifying, which means that
you're saying this weekend I go down to the notary and I could be a qualified intermediary.
You don't need to do that. You can print a business card. It's terrifying. So, right. And it's
well, there you have it, folks. I'm Nate Smoyer. You qualified intermediary.
This was great. So it's terrifying. And, when I do a lot of education, where I sponsor courses or things of that nature, and whenever it comes to this point, people are like aghast. Like, what do you mean? There's literally no regulation for you to hold someone's all of their money in escrow, and that's just the way it is. So I'll just call a spade a spade.
Okay, so we got to find out if they have. Say those things again.
Sure. So is there a CES on staff?
Okay.
Certification. What that's going to do is it's going to let you know that you're working with someone that's competent. There's the joining of the FEA, being a member there, which we find very important because it's a accountability and governing body of qualified intermediaries. I would also ask if they carry error and omissions insurance. I would ask them, do they commingle the funds? As in, your money, Nate, is in just one account with all these other people's money, right? Or do they use qualified escrow agreements, which is what we use, which again is a 3-signature move. So nothing's going anywhere without your approval. And then finally, I would find out how long they've been in business, and if they have any references. Because most, if someone's been in business for 15, 20, 25 years, in a lot of ways, a lot of that business is coming from doing great work with others and being honest and upright in the way that you handle yourself. So that'd probably be the best way to approach it.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to try and move in. I got about 5 questions left.
All right.
And these are like scenario type questions. Okay. And we'll see if you can handle these. All right. So doing a little bit of research, and I think you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned something about this. 1031 exchange. Can you utilize that with a 121 exemption?
Yes.
I've seen that came up, and I don't even know what the 121 exemption is. So maybe you can touch on what that is, and then also, can I leverage a 1031 exchange? Because I got confused in reading about it.
Yes. So you and I were talking earlier about primary residences, right? Mm-hmm. So one scenario that we've seen is individuals who buy a property through a 1031 exchange. They hold that property for a minimum of 2 years as an investment. Those 2 years that they hold satisfies the IRS's safe harbors as written in Revenue Procedure 2008-16. Then after 2 years, there is eligibility to convert that property into a primary residence. So you can eventually use that, though it's not not what it's necessarily intended for. We see it happen every now and again. But let's say you've owned that property now for 5 years, and I'm not a CPA, so CPA could probably speak more deeply into Section 121. But essentially, what that is it's an exclusion of capital gains, which allows a taxpayer, whether they're filing independently or jointly, to defer, if they're filing independently, $250,000 worth of capital gains, or if they're filing jointly, $500,000 for the capital gains. So let's say you bought a home but you have to live in it for 5 years, and you have to own it for 5 years and live in it for at least 2. So let's say your gain is just massive, and you've ticked off all the boxes that you've owned it for 5, you've lived in it for 2, you've rented it out for a couple, and your gain is just massive. It's $1 million or something crazy. You would be able to utilize Section 121 to defer a portion of the gain, and any leftover gain, you could use a 1031 to defer as well. So took you on a ride there.
No, this is great because that actually applies. I house hacked my way into getting a rental. Right. So this would actually directly apply to me. Yes. And I'm about like 5 or 6 months short on that, living in it for 2 years.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not a CPA, and I'm sure you probably will have a great one on your program. So I would definitely encourage you to bring up Section 121. But as far as I understand it, you're able to utilize those together and therefore defer even more capital gains on a primary residence if you do the sequence correctly.
Okay, so you touched on something right there. You mentioned, you're sure I'm going to have a CPA on my team.
Yep.
Okay, so I got my CPA. For people who aren't their own licensed realtor, because I am. Yep. I got my realtor. I got my qualified intermediary. Yep. Who else do I need on my team to do a 1031 exchange?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, you kind of covered it. When in our conversations with taxpayers, we're consistently referring them to their CPA or to another CPA if they don't have one, to just be able to get the hard numbers that they're looking for to understand, well, what exactly am I deferring here in terms of capital gains and depreciation recapture? And so I would say for sure a CPA. If you're in a situation where you're in an LLC and you're looking to split up the LLC to be able to, or dissolve it to be able to do a 1031, I'd recommend you have a good real estate attorney. They're just always really helpful to have insights from them. But really, I would say the CPA is essential.
Okay. That's good to know. We'll make sure we get one of those when we're ready to do our 1031 exchange. I'll call you up. I got to find that fourplex. I'm looking. Hey, if anybody watching this is the best time. Hey, anybody watching this, I'm looking for a fourplex. Okay. We've got a single family home that would sell really nicely in Bellingham, Washington. I want to move it into a fourplex. I want to get that economies of scale.
That's right. Let's get it going.
Right. Okay. So, I'm involved in, I work with some real estate tech companies here and there. I just had a discussion yesterday with a company that is looking to do an ICO backed by real estate assets. So a lot of people are looking at cryptocurrency and real estate. There's a story of a guy out of Seattle who sold his home using cryptocurrency and all kinds of crazy stuff that made it difficult, but it's possible. So how does cryptocurrency and can that work with 1031 exchanges? What do you know about that?
In regards to the home sale, I'm not very versed in that, so I can't really speak to that in detail. But if you search for 1031 exchange, a lot what will come up is individuals were trading cryptocurrency and using 1031s to kind of work to vacillate between different types of cryptocurrency. As of January 1st, 2018. One of the major changes over the entire lifespan of a 1031 exchange happened, and that's that personal property was removed from the code. So last year, and basically throughout the entire tenure for the most part of 1031 exchange, you would be able to take a highly appreciated asset such as an airplane, an instrument, a collectible car, something of that nature, and you would be able to 1031 exchange it as well as cryptocurrency. So as of January 1st, that's no longer available. Well, all that's available for a 1031 exchange based on the law is real property. So.
Okay. All right. So here's one off the wall for you. Can a non-US citizen participate in a 1031 exchange?
Yes. A non-citizen can. And let's go back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the basics of like kind. So these two often go hand in hand. So one rule for like kind is that the Internal Revenue Service looks at all property in the United States, including Guam and the Virgin Islands, as long as you can establish that you're doing business in the Virgin Islands, and excluding Puerto Rico, as like kind. What does that mean? You own a ranch in Montana, you can buy a condo in Florida. You have a warehouse in Hawaii, you can buy a single family home in Washington. That's all considered like kind. Internationally, the rest of the world is essentially considered like kind to itself. So if you were to own, as you do, a condo in Ibiza, because you do, right? And you wanted to buy, single family home in, say, Stockholm, Sweden, that would be fine. You would be able to trade like kind throughout the world. Now, what I often get here, because I'm based in Orlando, Florida, which is a great market for international investment, is, Tom, I've got a client, they own a home in Brazil and they want to buy an investment property in Orlando. Can that work? And the answer is no, because that's not considered like kind. So to answer your question, so that's just sort of set up to answer the question directly. If you have a non-citizen in the United States, that as long as they have some sort of ITIN or a taxpayer identification number, so some have a social security number or they have an EIN from some sort of business entity. As long as there's a taxable entity that buys and sells, it's eligible. But they would need to purchase property that fits the like kind requirements, as I just explained. Now, is FERPTA involved? Yes. Is it complicated? Yes. But 1031 also allows for deferral of the first FERPTA withholding if done correctly. So there's way to submit for the withholding certificate at the same time as getting your ITIN. Is all of this a little tricky? Absolutely. But the bottom line is, if you have an individual who wants to, they absolutely can do a 1031 exchange.
Okay, final question here on the scenarios. Let's say I own a fourplex. I find that fourplex, but I got to buy it with my brother, right?
Yeah.
And so my brother and I are on this, and we didn't actually have enough, so we have a third party, non-family member. I don't know. So we have to get 3 people buying in on this fourplex, right?
Yeah.
And we agree, hey, we're going to sell it. Can I 1031 and buy another property on my own? Can I do that?
Yes. So in your scenario, let's say you have an uncle, your brother, and you all go in and you all have equal share of the property. Absolutely. As long as you're on title individually in your name, you can take your portion and 1031. Your brother and your uncle can take their portion and pay the capital gains and depreciation recapture and be on their way. Now, what we see a lot of times is individuals in multi-member LLCs owning properties together for liability mitigation, of course. What we see often is individuals who, in that same scenario, 2 of my partners want the cash. I'm not ready to pay this capital gains and depreciation recapture. I want to defer it, but we own it in an LLC. If the same taxpayer who sells is the one who has to buy, how does that work? Well, the most common method is what's called the drop and swap method. And essentially what this does is it allows you to dissolve your LLC into tenants in common prior to the sale of the property. And then now that you're in your individual names, you can move forward as an individual and execute a 1031 exchange. Now, does that take away the liability coverage of the LLC? It sure does. Is it tricky, especially in states like California, where there's the franchise tax board? Absolutely. And can you do it the day before you sell your property? Yes, but it's not advisable. From what I understand,
what's the deal with that?
It's just again, a lot of this is about fact pattern. It's about intent, So what you're trying to do is establish, we didn't do this to try and cover up something or something. It's the recommended time frame is if there's any way that you can dissolve the LLC in the previous tax period, so the previous year, then that is the best way to do it. It's way more complicated than we can cover today, but it's definitely doable. And it's something that we hear about almost every day. It's very common. So again, that's the most common method. There are others, but all of them are precarious in their own way. And I would recommend that methodology.
Whew, that is a whole lot about 1031 exchanges. And now that you've just given me the free education, I'm going to go out and print a business card, qualified intermediary, watch out Tennessee.
It's a glamour profession, as you can tell. It's hot right now. Kids are loving it. No, it's funny, man. It's a small fraternity of people. There are certain individuals like my dad who have been in the game for over 15 years. and he's seen it all. And and then there are people that are really dedicated, also to lobbying to allow it to continue. Like I talked about in January 1st, it was on the block. It was something that could have gotten removed altogether.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was big that only personal property was there, but you have people that are going to the Hill and they're lobbying, saying, "Hey, we got to keep this thing moving forward." So I'm excited to be part of it. As I'm sure you can tell from my enthusiasm, I really believe in the 1031 exchange and I use the analogy or the metaphor as a golf club in the bag of an investor. Again, it's not to say that it's right every time. And it's not right to look at it to go, gosh, every property needs to be 1031. That's not the case.
Yeah.
If you have a diversified portfolio that you're strategizing, some flips, some buy and holds, it's just a great option that you should be discussing. And if you're like, you know what, doesn't make sense, great, because there are a lot of rules and regulations and restrictions about it that if you just took the cash, paid the cap gains and the depreciation recapture, you'd be much more malleable to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But I believe in it, and I think it's something that is really helpful.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all this. This has actually been eye-opening. I feel like this is great. I gotta find more people who are just willing to tell me all their secrets. Then I could just go ahead and register as the expert. But hey, look. So for people watching this, maybe they have some questions. They want to, they want to follow up with you and see if it's the right thing. How do people get in touch with you, Tom?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll just kind of run it down here, but then any of our videos, I'll add my contact info on the comments. But our website's atlas1031.com. That's ATLAS1031.com. My email is Tom Gustafson at atlas1031.com, and you can also find that on the site. And like I said from the beginning, this is all that we do. We're not a subset of a larger company. We only do 1031 exchanges all day, every day. So it's, we're working for our clients nights and weekends. We're passionate about making sure that this works out for them. So we're accessible, we're available, and that's the best way to get a hold of us. And I'll also add my cell to any of these as well, so people can call me and we can talk through it.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate it. Thanks so much. And if you guys have questions for Tom, make sure you hit him up and find out if the 1031 exchange is for you. If you guys learned anything from this conversation, let us know. Just like, share, comment on the video wherever you're seeing it posted here, and we'll keep more of these coming at you. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate.